Maybe you came here for a calm story, something to rest your mind for a while. But this story carries a question that is hard to forget. How much can one tired person risk before kindness becomes an act of rebellion? Thank you for spending this time here. Let's step into the rain and find out. Rain made the whole city sound tired. It rattled on the roof of the night bus. It hissed under the tires. It ran in silver lines down the windshield until the traffic lights of Harbor Row became red and green smears on the glass. Frank Doyle leaned forward in the driver's seat and worked the wipers again, even though they were already moving as fast as they could. The left blade skipped every third pass. It had been doing that for 6 weeks. Northline bus service had marked the repair request as non-essential. A lot of things on Route 17 were non-essential. The cracked heater vent near the back door, the loose step at the front, the old radio that needed a slap on the side before it would clear its throat and speak. The driver, if Frank believed the last message from dispatch. He did not. He kept both hands on the wheel and guided the bus through a long puddle beside the closed fish market. The bus shuddered, coughed, and pushed through. Behind him, 4 passengers rocked with the motion and said nothing. At this hour, people did not talk much. A nurse in a blue coat slept with her forehead against the window. A broad-shouldered man in work boots held a lunch pail between his knees. A woman with gray hair and a grocery bag watched the rain as if she had seen worse and expected more. Near the rear, Walt Price sat with his hood up and his hands wrapped around an empty paper cup. Walt had no address that Frank knew of, but he knew every warm corner between the port and the old rail yard. Frank glanced at the clock above the fare box. 4:13 in the morning. One more loop, then the depot. Then coffee from a machine that tasted like burnt tin. Then a call to his sister before she took her morning pills. Then maybe 4 hours of sleep in the rented room behind Bay 3 if the pipes were quiet. The radio gave a dry pop. Route 17, this is Northline Dispatch. You are 8 minutes behind the posted schedule. Frank pressed the button with his thumb. Copy that. You had an unscheduled stop near Pier Road. A man slipped at the curb. Was he a paying passenger? Frank looked at the road. He was a man on the ground. There was a pause. He could hear the thin hum of the dispatch office, warm and far away. Frank, you have a final route review pending. Do not make this harder. He released the button. The nurse opened one eye. They still on you about stopping? Frank looked at her in the mirror. Her name was Nora Pike. She worked the long shift at County General and rode his bus 3 nights a week. They like a clean schedule, he said. They like pretending the city is cleaner than it is. The workman gave a quiet grunt that might have been agreement. Frank knew him as Luis Grant, night maintenance at the cold storage plant. He had heavy hands, kind eyes, and a habit of fixing broken things without saying he had done it. Frank did not answer. He turned the bus toward the far edge of Harbor Row, where the city thinned into warehouses, old fencing, and the dim blue lights of Gate 19. Gate 19 had been built after Earth joined the outer transit lanes. The brochures called it a local exchange point. Frank called it a place where tired people waited under bad lights. Sometimes miners came through, sometimes contract cooks, sometimes cargo handlers who had not seen home in years. Tonight, the electronic board above the shelter blinked empty. No arrivals, no departures. The ticket kiosk was dark. Rain poured from the gutter in a steady rope. Frank almost drove past. Then Walt sat up. Frank, he said, there are people under there. Frank slowed. At first, he saw only shapes. Small shapes, hunched beneath the metal roof of the station. Then the bus headlights swept across them, and the shapes became faces. Not human. 8 elderly aliens sat close together on the bench and on the wet pavement beneath it. Their skin was the soft gray-brown of river stones. Fine, pale lines crossed their temples like old scars or roots. Their clothes were thin, patched, and soaked at the edges. One of them had wrapped both feet in strips of cloth instead of shoes. Another held a small metal box against his chest with both hands. A young woman stood beside them, trying to keep a sheet of torn plastic over the shoulders of the oldest one. She was alien too, the same Varen features, but younger, tall and narrow, with dark hair plastered to her face by rain. Even exhausted, she had a striking beauty, not soft or decorative, but sharp, with worry and will. She held a cloth satchel under one arm. Papers bulged from it, bent and damp. Every elderly Varen held a small transit card. Each card bore a red stamp. Frank could read the 2 words through the rain. Transport denied. He stopped the bus. Dispatch crackled at once. Route 17, you are not scheduled to stop at Gate 19. Frank set the brake. I see that. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Rain mist followed it across the steps. The young Varen woman turned fast. Her eyes fixed on Frank's uniform, then on the Northline badge, then on the inside of the bus. She moved half a step in front of the elders. We do not have fare, she said. Her American English was careful, with a slight tension around each word, as if she had learned it from signs and instructions, not from people. Frank looked at the oldest woman, whose hands were shaking so hard the transit card tapped against her knee. Then, do not pay, he said. Get them inside. The young woman did not move. If you take us, they will mark you. Lady, Frank said, I have been marked by better offices than this one. Bring them in before somebody freezes. The oldest woman tried to stand. Her knees failed. The young woman caught her, but the satchel slid from under her arm. Several papers spilled into the rain. Frank came down 2 steps. Nora. The nurse was already up. Louise stood behind her, one hand on the rail. Bring the weak ones first, Nora said. The young woman stared at them as if kindness in a bus aisle might be a trick. Frank stepped back and held the door with his shoulder. Inside is warmer. That is all I am offering right now. The first elder climbed aboard with both hands on the rail. The loose front step shifted under his foot. Frank braced it with his boot. The second elder needed Louise on one side and Nora on the other. The oldest woman whispered an apology in a language Frank did not know as her wet sleeve brushed the fare box. No charge for rainwater, Frank said. The young woman was last. She snatched the papers from the ground, shoved them into the satchel, and climbed aboard without taking her eyes off Frank. Name? He asked. She hesitated. Sarah Venn. Frank nodded. Frank Doyle. Sit them in the middle rows, away from the doors. I told you, Sarah said. We cannot pay. Frank reached over and turned the fare box off. Its screen went black. Now nobody can. The gray-haired woman with the grocery bag, Ruth Bell from the all-night diner on Crow Street, took off her scarf and wrapped it around the shoulders of the oldest Varen woman. Luis removed his work jacket and gave it to the elder with cloth around his feet. Walt pulled a blanket from beneath his seat. It was thin and smelled faintly of smoke, but he folded it with care before offering it. Sarah watched all this with an expression Frank could not read. Nora guided the oldest woman into a seat. What is her name? Sarah knelt beside her. Etta Venn. She is my grandmother. How long has she been in the cold? Since the last shuttle left. When was that? Sarah swallowed. Yesterday. Frank felt something inside him tighten. He closed the door and turned the heat as high as the old bus could manage. Warm air coughed from the vents, then steadied. The radio popped again. Route 17. Explain your stop. Frank looked at the mirror. 8 elderly faces watched him. So did Sarah Venn. Passenger assistants, he said. Are they registered passengers? Frank picked up one of the transit cards from the dashboard where an elder had set it with trembling fingers. The red stamp had soaked slightly in the rain, but remained clear. Transport denied. Below it was a code. Frank looked at the next card. Same code, same time, same red stamp. He checked a third. Same. Not a missed ticket. Not an individual denial. A batch. Frank, dispatch said. Answer the question. He put the cards down. They are on my bus, he said. That is the answer I have. He released the brake and pulled away from gate 19. Behind him, Sarah grabbed the pole as the bus moved. Where are you taking us? Somewhere with a roof that does not leak, Frank said. Then we figure out why 8 old people got the same red stamp at the same minute. She went still. Frank saw it in the mirror. Not surprise. Fear. The first Helix notice reached the dashboard 3 minutes later. It slid over the bus route display in clean white letters. Return unauthorized dependents to gate 19. Frank stared at the word in the center. Dependents, not passengers, not elders, not refugees, not people. He switched the display off. It came back on. Nora looked up from Etta's pulse. Frank, I see it. Sarah rose from her seat. You must stop. If they know we are here, they will come. Who is they? Helix Transit Authority. Luis swore under his breath. Frank knew the name. Everybody in Harbor Row did. Helix moved labor across the outer lanes. They brought in contract workers, sent out freight crews, and handled the alien transit gates no one in city government wanted to understand. Their buildings were clean. Their guards were polite. Their mistakes vanished into forms no ordinary person could read. Frank kept the bus moving. "What did you do?" he asked. Sarah's face hardened. "We survived." Nora pressed 2 fingers against Etta's wrist. "This woman needs real heat and oxygen soon." "We can stop at Ruth's diner," Frank said. "Crow Street." Ruth Bell lifted her chin. "Back door still works. I have soup on low." Sarah shook her head. "No, if we stop, they take us." "Your grandmother cannot make a long ride like this," Nora said. Sarah looked at Etta. The older woman opened her eyes, and a few words passed between them in Veyron. The language was soft and dry, like leaves rubbed between fingers. Sarah turned back to Frank. "If they take us before sunrise, our record closes." Frank kept his eyes on the road. "What record?" She gripped the satchel. "The one that says we still exist." No one spoke for a few seconds. Rain hammered the roof. Frank turned off the main avenue and took a narrower road beneath the elevated rail. The bus leaned hard. One of the elders gasped. Frank slowed, then steadied the wheel. "Talk plain," he said. "I drive better when I know what is chasing me." Sarah sat in the front side seat, close enough for him to hear without raising her voice. She kept the satchel on her lap with both hands over it. "We are Veyron," she said. "From Mara Vey." Frank nodded once. "Mining world?" "Was. Mines, fiber mills, heat plants. My grandparents worked all their lives. Everyone here worked. Tovin repaired ore lifts. Mira kept family records and death names. Oren maintained water pumps. My grandmother kept the heat house in winter." Etta's lips moved faintly at the mention of the heat house. Sarah continued. "When Mara Vey's contracts ended, Helix came to move workers. Young workers. Strong workers. Those with transferable labor value. The elders were told not to panic. They were told there would be a later shuttle." "There was not," Ruth said quietly. Sarah shook her head. "There was a shuttle. It brought them here." "To Earth?" "To Gate 19, a transit holding point. We were told Earth had temporary shelter review. Then the mark came." She pulled one card from the satchel and held it up. "Transport denied does not only mean they cannot board another shuttle, it starts a timer. If no local authority accepts them into protection before sunrise, the system records them as voluntary transit abandonment." Frank glanced at her. "Voluntary? That is the word they use when poor people cannot reach the desk in time." The bus hit a pothole. Etta coughed, a thin, wet sound that made Nora turn sharply. Frank eased off the gas. "And after sunrise?" Sarah looked toward the back of the bus. The old Veyron were huddled beneath borrowed coats, their faces half lit by streetlights. "After sunrise, Helix owes them nothing. Not transport, not food, not return, not proof. They become unclaimed." Walt stared at his empty cup. "Unclaimed," he said, "like lost luggage." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Luggage is usually stored." The dashboard flashed again. "Return unauthorized dependents." A new line appeared beneath it. "Driver cooperation will be recorded." Frank took his hand from the wheel long enough to press the old manual route key. The screen flickered, resisted, then returned to the normal Northline map. He turned the bus into a service road between 2 warehouses. Dispatch came through immediately. "Route 17, you have deviated from approved path." Frank pressed the radio. "Road flooding." "City sensors show no flooding on your assigned route." "Then the sensors have better tires than I do." "Frank, stop the vehicle and wait for instructions." He looked in the mirror. Sarah was watching him again, but now there was something else under her fear. A question. He released the button and kept driving. Nora stood. "Etta's temperature is too low. I have a warming pack, but she needs more than this bus." "Ruth," Frank said, "can your diner still take back alley access?" "If the dumpster truck did not block me again." "Luis?" The workman leaned forward. "I have a portable cell in my locker at the cold storage plant. Small one. Could boost your heater for a while." Frank nodded. "We stop at Ruth's, then Louis runs across for the cell." Sarah stood. "No." Frank did not look away from the road. "You have a better plan?" "We keep moving." "Your grandmother will die moving." Sarah flinched, but she did not look away. "If Helix takes the papers, the rest will disappear." Frank slowed at a red light no one else was waiting for. "What papers?" She tightened her hands on the satchel. "Not yet," she said. Frank studied the empty intersection. In the old days, before the accident, he would have argued. He would have said, "Trust me," as if trust was something a uniform could ask for and receive. He knew better now. "Fine," he said. "Do not trust me yet. Trust her pulse." He nodded toward Nora. Sarah looked back at Etta. Nora had both hands around the old woman's fingers and was breathing slowly, trying to make Etta match the rhythm. At last, Sarah sat down. 10 minutes, she said. No longer. Frank drove. The diner on Crow Street had a sign that read Bells, though half the letters were dark. Ruth Bell owned it, cooked in it, slept over it, and fought the landlord every month to keep it open. Frank parked in the alley behind the kitchen, out of sight from the main road. Ruth was out of the bus before anyone asked. She unlocked the back door and waved them in. "Bring the weakest first," she said. "Do not drip on the fryer. It already hates me." The warmth of the diner hit like mercy. It smelled of coffee, onions, old grease, and soup. The Varen elders entered slowly, blinking under the yellow lights. Frank watched Etta touch the edge of a table as if she had forgotten what indoor furniture felt like. Sarah did not relax. She stood where she could see both doors. Nora settled Etta into a booth and checked her breathing. Luis disappeared through the alley toward the cold storage plant. Walt went with him without being asked. The other passengers moved awkwardly at first, then found jobs. Ruth filled cups with hot water. The nurse tore open warming packs. The workman left his lunch pail on a table and told the elders to take what they wanted. One of them, a small Varen woman with clear eyes, looked at the sandwich as if it were a formal gift. Sarah said, "Mirasol thanks you." "Tell Mirasol she can thank me by eating," Ruth said. Sarah translated. Mirasol bowed her head, then took the sandwich with both hands. Frank stood near the kitchen door and entered notes into the route log. Gate 19, 4:19 in the morning, 8 Varen elders, 1 adult escort, Sarah Venn. Transport denied stamp, same code, same time. Signs of exposure, no luggage beyond personal cloth bags. Sarah came to him. "Why are you writing that?" "Because logs survive longer than promises." Her face changed. "You know that?" Frank kept typing. "I know what companies do when they want a thing to become nobody's fault." The back door opened. Luis and Walt returned, both wet. Luis carried a compact power cell against his chest. "Not much," he said. "Enough to help the heater if the bus does not hate it." "The bus hates everything," Frank said. "But it listens to bribes." A chime sounded from the dashboard outside. Frank heard it through the open diner door. He went to the bus. The screen had lit itself again. This time a face appeared. Male, pale, composed, with silver helix insignia at the collar. The man looked like he had never stood in rain. "Driver Frank Doyle," the man said. "I am Maris Velek of Helix Transit Authority. You are currently transporting unauthorized dependents." Frank stood in the alley rain and looked up at the screen through the open bus door. "They have names. Names are not in dispute. They will be if your timer runs out." A slight pause. Inside the diner, Sarah had gone still. Maris Velek smiled without warmth. "Miss Venn has misrepresented a routine transit classification. These individuals were denied onward movement under resource priority rules. They are to be returned to Gate 19 for proper processing." "What happens at sunrise?" "That is not your concern." "It became my concern when they stepped on my bus." "Your employer has been notified. If you cooperate, your unscheduled route activity may be recorded as a welfare misunderstanding." Frank laughed once. It had no humor in it. A welfare misunderstanding. "Return the dependents and surrender all transit documents in Miss Venn's possession." There it was. Not just the people, the papers. Frank glanced toward the diner. Sarah stood in the doorway, listening. Her face was pale. "No," Frank said. Maris did not raise his voice. "You should consider your history, Mr. Doyle. Northline Bus Service reports a prior disciplinary incident involving unauthorized route deviation and damage to company property. It would be unfortunate if that pattern continued." Frank felt the old hook in his ribs, the flood road, the stalled cars, the woman with a child on the roof of a taxi, the sound the bus made when water hit the engine, the letter from Northline afterward, failure to follow approved route. He looked at his hands. They were wet and cold, but steady. "Pattern is the right word," he said. "I keep finding people where your approved routes do not go." He shut the bus door on Maris Velek's face. When he turned, Sarah was looking at him as if he had just stepped off a ledge. "You should not have done that," she said. "Probably." "He can ruin you. That part is already underway." Ruth came out behind Sarah, wiping her hands on a towel. Then we better move before he gets better at it. Inside the diner, Etta Venn had warmed enough to speak. Her voice was soft. Sarah bent close, listened, then translated. She says she is sorry for taking your heat. Frank looked at the old woman. Etta's shoulders were narrow beneath Ruth's scarf. Her hands, folded on the table, were scarred from years of work. Tell her the heat was sitting there doing nothing. Sarah translated. Etta listened. For the first time, the faintest smile touched her mouth. Mirasol took something from inside her coat. It was a folded sheet, worn almost through at the creases. She spread it on the table. Names filled it in careful columns. Sarah said, Mira kept the village names, births, pairings, deaths, workhouses, who left, who did not. Nora leaned over the paper. This is more than 8 people. Yes, Sarah said. These are the elders who were promised later transport. Some were sent to other gates. Some never arrived. Some were marked before we saw them again. Oren Pell opened the small metal box he had held since Gate 19. Inside lay a transit card wrapped in cloth. The red stamp on it had faded, but Frank could still read the words. Transport denied. Sarah's voice changed when she translated Oren's words. His wife, Luma, received the mark 3 days before us. They told him she had been moved to medical transit. He found this card in a waste bin before they put us on the shuttle. Ruth set a cup down too hard. Soup sloshed over the rim. Medical transit, she said. That is what they called it? Sarah nodded. Frank thought of the word unclaimed. He thought of all the clean words people used when the truth was too ugly to fit on a form. He turned to Sarah. What else is in the satchel? She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she opened it. She removed a stack of damp papers, a thin data wafer in a cracked sleeve, and a folded contract with helix markings. Her hands trembled, but not from cold now. I was the one who read for them, she said. On Marave, I was proud because I could read Standard English and Helix trade script. They came to our heat house. They said the young workers had to leave first, but elders would be protected in later transit. I told them it was safe to sign. Her mouth tightened. It was not safe. I did not understand the abandonment clause. Or maybe I did, and I wanted so badly to believe them that I ignored the shape of it. Etta reached for her hand. Sarah let her take it. The documents show the clause was activated before we reached Earth, Sarah said. It was planned. We are the pilot group. Pilot group? Nora asked. If Helix clears our record by sunrise without local challenge, they can repeat the process on other low-yield worlds. Elder transport costs will vanish. Luis stared at the paper. Vanish? No, Frank said. Be moved on to someone too weak to complain. He looked at the clock above Ruth's counter. 5:07. Less than an hour to sunrise. Walt came to the window. 2 vehicles at the corner. Frank turned. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw blue-white lights moving slowly along Crow Street. Not police lights. Cleaner. Helix. Ruth locked the front door. Frank gathered the papers and handed half to Ruth. Copy these. Photograph them. Send them to someone who will not delete them. My nephew works at the city clerk's office, Ruth said. Wake him up. Sarah stiffened. No. The originals stay with me. Yes, Frank said. But copies travel faster than people. She looked at the door, then at the elders. Mirasol spoke. Sarah closed her eyes as she listened. What did she say? Frank asked. Sarah opened her eyes. She said names should never be kept in one hand. She gave Ruth the copies. They loaded the bus in less than 3 minutes. Luis connected the portable cell beneath the side panel, while rain ran down the back of his neck. Tovin Rel leaned beside him, one thin hand pressed to the bus wall. He made a clicking sound and pointed to a relay. Sarah translated fast. He says not that one. It will burn out. The lower line. Luis looked once, changed the clamp, and the heater coughed back to life. I will be damned, he said. Tell him Northline should hire him. Sarah translated. Tovin made a dry sound that might have been laughter. Frank climbed into the driver's seat. Anyone who wants off, this is the stop. I will not hold it against you. No one moved. Ruth came up the steps carrying a plastic tub of soup cups. My diner is closed for weather. Frank looked at her. Weather? She pointed at the rain. Looks bad. Nora sat beside Etta with the small oxygen canister she had taken from her emergency kit. Luis took a seat near the front. Walt sat on the steps behind Frank, as if guarding the door with a paper cup and a blank could stop Helix. Sarah stood in the aisle. You still do not know if we can reach Mercy Hall, she said. No, Frank said. "But I know how not to go back." He pulled into the alley just as the Helix vehicles turned onto the street. Frank did not take the main road. He cut behind the diner, through a service lane so narrow the bus mirrors nearly scraped brick. The old bus groaned. Frank kept it slow, steady, patient. A Helix vehicle appeared at the alley mouth behind them. Its lights filled the mirror. Frank turned hard beneath the rail trestle. The bus dropped into the old worker road. Walt laughed once. "No one remembers this road." "I do," Frank said. "Road is rough," Louis warned. "Bus is rough," Frank said. "They are made for each other." The ride shook everyone awake. Ruth held soup cups steady. Nora kept one hand on Etta. Sarah braced herself between two poles, the satchel strapped across her body now. The dashboard flashed red. Remote compliance request. Frank ignored it. The steering tightened. He felt it at once. The bus wanted to slow. Helix or Northline had found the control system. "Tovin," Frank said. "If your ears know anything about old Earth buses, now is the time." Sarah translated. Tovin struggled forward. Luis helped him kneel by the front panel. Frank popped the cover with the heel of his hand. Tovin listened. Not to the radio, not to the alarm, to the machine. He pointed to two wires and spoke quickly. Sarah translated. "He says the lock is not in the engine. It is in the route governor. The bus is being told it is outside allowed streets." Frank almost smiled. "Story of my life." Louis reached for the wires. "Cut?" Tovin snapped a word. "No," Sarah said. "Not cut, bridge." Frank kept the wheel steady with his left hand while Luis and Tovin worked at his feet. The bus slowed to 20 miles an hour, then 15, then 12. Behind them, Helix lights appeared at the top of the service road. Nora said, "Etta is fading." Frank leaned forward. "Come on, old girl." Louis made the bridge. The bus lurched. The governor alarm died. The engine roared back under Frank's foot. The passengers let out one breath together. Frank looked down at Tovin. "You just saved my route." Sarah translated. Tovin, still kneeling, touched the bus floor with the affection of a man greeting another tired worker. The radio cracked with Northline dispatch, sharper now. "Frank Doyle, stop the vehicle immediately. You have been suspended from active service. Continued operation will be treated as unauthorized use of company property." Frank pressed the button. "Understood." "Then stop." "Cannot." "Frank, your commercial license is under review. Your housing agreement with Northline is tied to employment status. Do you understand what that means?" He did. His small room behind Bay 3, the narrow bed, the sink that dripped, the cabinet where he kept Maggie's medicine receipts because the insurance office lost things unless he kept copies. All of it was tied to a job that had never loved him back but had kept him standing. "I understand," he said. "Then do not throw your life away over a Helix classification." Frank looked at Etta, whose breath came shallow and fast. He looked at Sarah, who stood pale and furious in the aisle. He looked at Orrin Pell, holding the dead wife's card in both hands. "That is the problem," Frank said. "You keep calling people classifications." He switched the radio off. For a while, only the road spoke. The first pale line of dawn showed behind the warehouses. Sarah saw it too. "Frank, I know." She moved closer. "If the bus cannot reach Mercy Hall, I will take the documents and run." "No, you cannot forbid me." "No, I cannot." "Then do not say no." Frank kept his eyes on the road. "If you run alone, Maris takes you alone. If you reach the desk without them, Helix calls the elders unverifiable. If they take them without you, they lose their translator and their records. That is why he keeps asking for you first." Sarah's hand tightened around the pole. "I did this." "No, I told them to sign." "You told them what you believed." "I was wrong." "Then be wrong with witnesses," Frank said. "Do not be right alone in an alley where no one can hear you." She turned away, breathing hard. Etta whispered from her seat. Sarah closed her eyes. "My grandmother says," Sarah translated, her voice breaking at the edge, "that a heat keeper does not carry fire away from the room. She keeps it where the cold people are." Frank nodded once. "Your grandmother knows routes." The bus climbed the last ramp. Mercy Hall's roof appeared ahead, dark against the paling sky. Then the wheels locked. The bus screamed. Frank stood on the brake with both feet. The old vehicle slid sideways, shuddered, and stopped hard enough to throw Luis against the rail. Soup spilled. Someone cried out. Nora grabbed Etta before she fell. Frank's shoulder hit the steering wheel. Pain flashed down his arm, but he stayed upright. Outside, two Helix vehicles pulled across the road in front of Mercy Hall. A third closed behind them. The dashboard went black. The heater died. For 1 second, no one moved. Then the cold began returning. Maris Valek stepped from the lead vehicle under a clear shield that kept the rain off his coat. Dawn was spreading behind him, thin and gray. He walked to the bus door and looked up at Frank through the glass. The door controls were dead. Maris lifted a small device. The door hissed, then unlocked. Frank stood. "Stay seated," he said to the passengers. His voice was calm enough that people obeyed before they understood. Nora spoke from the middle row. "Frank, Etta needs oxygen now. The canister is almost empty." Sarah moved toward the front. Frank held up a hand without turning. "Not yet." The door opened. Cold air entered like a hand. Maris Valek stood at the foot of the steps. 2 Helix officers waited behind him, polite and still. "Mr. Doyle," Maris said, "you have caused unnecessary distress. Surrender Miss Venn, the transit materials, and the dependents. I will record your cooperation." Frank stood on the top step. "They are going to Mercy Hall. They are not eligible. Janet Cole will decide that. Local clerks do not override Helix transit closure. They do if the people are on Earth soil and still breathing." Maris's expression barely changed. "Your license is revoked as of this moment. Northline has confirmed your suspension. Your employer housing will be terminated pending review. I suggest you avoid criminal obstruction." There it was. Clean. Official. The floor dropping out. Behind him, Etta coughed again. Nora said, "Frank?" Maris looked past him. "Miss Venn, you may exit now. If you comply, I can recommend separate review for your personal status." Sarah stepped into the aisle. "And them?" Maris tilted his head. "Their review window has nearly closed. That is why you stopped us here." "I stopped an unauthorized vehicle." "No," Sarah said. "You stopped their names." Maris extended a hand. "Documents." Frank looked at the dead dashboard. Then at the old radio. He reached under the panel and flipped the metal switch. The bus speakers squealed. Outside, one of the old street horns on Mercy Hall crackled. Maris looked up. Frank picked up the hand mic. "Do not," Maris said. Frank pressed the button. "This is Frank Doyle, driver of Northline Route 17, bus 406. His voice came out through the bus speakers, and half a second later, from the old horn above Mercy Hall's front doors. Time is 5:49 in the morning. Location is Mercy Hall Road, Harbor Row. I picked up 8 elderly Veyron passengers at Gate 19 at 4:19 in the morning. They were wet, cold, and marked transport denied with the same code and timestamp. They did not abandon transit. They were alive on Earth soil when I opened my door." Maris moved up 1 step. "Stop the transmission." Frank continued. "I turned off fare collection. I deviated from route. I disabled secondary tracking. I refused a Helix return order. Those decisions were mine. No passenger on this bus directed me to do it." Luis stood behind him. Ruth stood too. Nora did not leave Etta, but she lifted her phone and began recording. Frank's voice stayed steady. "One passenger, Etta Venn, is in medical distress and needs immediate shelter and oxygen. Sarah Venn carries documents showing Helix Transit Authority activated transport denial before local review. The passengers are not unclaimed. I am claiming witness." The word surprised even him. Not claiming ownership. Not claiming control. Witness. Behind Maris, the front doors of Mercy Hall opened. A woman in a gray cardigan stepped out, hair pinned badly, identification badge swinging from a lanyard. Janet Cole. She looked like someone who had been dragged from a desk before coffee and had decided to be angry about the right thing. "What is going on out here?" she called. Maris turned. "This is a Helix transit matter. Please return inside." Frank spoke into the mic. "Janet Cole, City Emergency Intake. This is Frank Doyle. I have 8 elderly Veyron needing protection entry before sunrise. I have witness logs, medical distress, and documents." Janet stared at the bus. Then she looked at Etta through the windshield. "Bring them in," she said. Maris's voice sharpened for the first time. "You do not have authority to interfere with transit closure." Janet took 1 step down. "I have authority to open a warming room for people standing in my street." "These are not registered people under local intake." Frank turned slightly. "Then register them." Maris signaled his officers. They moved toward the bus door. Frank stepped down 1 stair, placing his body between them and Sarah. His shoulder throbbed. His legs felt heavy. He had not slept. He had just lost his job. He was afraid. He stayed there. To get to them, he said, "You go through me while the city is listening." The street horn hummed above Mercy Hall. Windows opened in the apartment block across the road. A porch light came on. Then another. Ruth Bell pushed past the seats with a tub of soup in her arms. "Walt?" she said. "Door." Walt slipped through the rear emergency release that Tovin had helped free and jumped down to the pavement. He ran toward the side entrance of Mercy Hall, waving both arms. Sarah stepped beside Frank. Her hands shook as she opened the satchel, but her voice was clear. "My name is Sarah Venn of Marave," she said. "I translated the Helix forms for these elders. I believed the forms protected them. I was wrong. The clause was used to mark them as if they had chosen to be left behind. They did not choose this." She held out the data wafer. "This is the original list before Helix removed the elders. This is the recording of the promise that later transport would come. This is the command code that placed the denial mark before we reached Earth. This group is a test. If their names close at sunrise, Helix can use the same method on other poor worlds." Maris said, "Unverified allegations." Mirasol rose slowly behind Sarah. She was small, and Ruth's borrowed scarf nearly swallowed her. Yet when she spoke, the bus quieted. Sarah translated after every line. "I am Mirasol, keeper of names for the lower heat quarter of Marave. I remember Etta Venn, heat keeper. Tovin Rel, ore lift mechanic. Oren Pell, water pump hand. Luma Pell, marked and lost before Earth. I remember Danelle Voss, fiber spinner, gate 12. I remember Senna Rel, food line worker, gate 8. I remember all names given to my keeping. We did not abandon transit, we were told to wait." Oren Pell opened his metal box and held up Luma's card. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said one sentence. Sarah translated it with tears in her eyes. "My wife did not become paperwork." Tovin Rel leaned on Luis and pointed toward the bus panel. He spoke in short bursts. Sarah translated. "The lock code on this bus is from Helix Field Control. It is the same kind used on Marave ore lifts when workers were sealed out of closed shafts. He says he knows the sound because he spent 30 years opening machines that richer people said were too expensive to fix." Etta Venn lifted her head. Nora tried to stop her from speaking, but Etta insisted. Her voice was thin, almost lost under the rain. Sarah bent close, then repeated the words. "I am Etta Venn. I kept the heat house. When children were cold, they came to my room. When workers came home wet, I dried their sleeves. I signed because they told my granddaughter we would not be left behind. I do not want to be carried as a burden. I want my name put where the cold cannot take it." No one moved. Then Ruth Bell stepped into the rain with the first blanket. "I will sign witness," she said. Luis came beside her. "Me too." Nora looked at Janet. "This woman needs oxygen now. If your form has a box for that, check it while we carry her." Walt Price stood at the side entrance of Mercy Hall, holding it open with his back. "Doors open," he shouted. "Heat is on." People were coming now. From the bus door to the Mercy Hall entrance, people stood shoulder to shoulder under the gray dawn, holding blankets, phones, cups of hot water, and open hands. Maris looked at the line. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Janet Cole came to the bottom of the bus steps with a tablet in her hand. "I am opening temporary emergency protection intake for 8 Varen individuals," she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "On Earth soil, under medical distress and witnessed abandonment claim." Maris said, "You will trigger an inter-authority dispute." Janet looked at Etta. "Then I will spell my name right on the report." She looked up at Frank. "Bring them in." Frank turned to the bus. "Slow," he said. "Middle rows first. Keep Etta seated until Nora has oxygen ready." He helped Tovin down the steps. Luis took the old mechanic's other arm. Tovin paused at the bottom and touched the bus side again, grateful to the machine that had carried him. Mirasol came next, clutching her list. Oren Pell stepped down with Luma's card held inside both palms. Ruth wrapped blankets around each elder as they passed. Walt told them where to place their feet on the wet pavement. Nora and 2 Mercy Hall volunteers brought Etta last, oxygen mask in place, Sarah walking beside her with one hand on her grandmother's shoulder. Maris did not touch them. Frank stayed on the bus until the last elder crossed the threshold. Then he picked up the route log. Northline dispatch crackled from the radio, which had somehow come back to life. "Frank Doyle, remain with the vehicle. A supervisor is en route. You are suspended without pay, pending investigation." Frank lifted the mic one last time. "Copy that." He set it down. Frank stepped inside. The warmth was not strong, but it was real. Janet looked up. I need your signature. Frank took the stylus. What am I signing? Your route deviations, your witness statement, your acceptance of responsibility for transport from Gate 19 to Mercy Hall. Will it put them in the system? Janet nodded. It already has. I need your signature to lock the record. He signed. His name looked small on the screen. Frank Doyle, driver, witness. Janet tapped the tablet. 8 Veyren individuals entered under temporary Earth protection at 5:57 in the morning. The first edge of sun broke above the harbor. Sarah stared at the screen as if it might vanish. Say their names. Janet understood. She read them, one by one. Eda Ven, Tovin Rel, Mira Sol, Oren Pell. The other 4 elders, quiet until then, heard their names too, and each answered in a trembling voice. Sarah translated only when needed. Most of the time, the answer was clear enough without translation. Here, here, here. Eda Ven opened her eyes when her name was read. She looked at Sarah, then at Frank. Sarah spoke softly. She says the room is warm. Frank had no answer for that. His phone buzzed. Maggie. He stepped into the side hallway before answering. Frank? His sister's voice was thick with sleep. Northline called my emergency contact. What happened? Frank closed his eyes. I stopped for people in the rain. A pause. Are you hurt? No. Are they? Not anymore, I hope. Another pause. Maggie knew him too well. How bad is it? I may have lost the job, Frank said. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Did you open the door? He swallowed. Yes. Then we will figure out the rest. Frank leaned his forehead against the hallway wall. Your medicine. We will figure out the rest, she repeated, stronger this time. Go help the people you stopped for. He nodded, though she could not see it. Sarah looked at Frank's uniform. The Northline badge, the rain darkening his sleeves, the tired set of his shoulders. You lost much, she said. Not as much as they tried to take from you. I nearly gave them the papers at Gate 19, she said. I thought if I obeyed, they might be gentle with the elders. Frank looked toward Maris, who still stood outside in the rain speaking into a device, his clean shield making a dry circle around him. Gentle systems do not leave old people at closed stations. Sarah nodded. On Marave, we had a saying, a door is not kind because it exists. It is kind only when someone opens it. Frank looked at the bus through the glass doors. Old 406 sat crooked in the street, rain running down its sides, heater dead, route display flickering nonsense. It looked finished. Then Tovin Rel tapped Frank's arm. The old mechanic pointed at the bus, then at Luis, then mimed a turning wrench. Frank stared. He wants to fix it? Sarah listened to Tovin, then smiled through exhaustion. He says the bus carried the cold people. It deserves not to be abandoned. Luis heard that and clapped his hands once. I like him. The days after that did not become easy. By noon, Northline fired Frank and ordered him out of his depot room. Helix filed complaints, but Ruth's copies, Nora's medical report, Janet's timed intake, and the recordings from the bus made the case impossible to bury. Harbor Row argued for days, then opened a small program at Mercy Hall called Last Stop Shelter. The city bought old bus 406 for $1. Janet called Frank with a job offer that included basic insurance and the same ugly route. That night, Frank Doyle put on a plain city jacket instead of the Northline uniform. No shiny badge, no company threat stitched over his heart. Just his name on a small patch and the words Last Stop Shelter beneath it. The bus waited outside Mercy Hall. Luis had polished nothing. The dents remained. The floor still creaked. The left wiper still skipped, though now only every 5th pass. But the heater worked. The front step had been fixed. The route display glowed in soft amber letters. Last Stop Shelter. Sarah stood by the door with a folder under one arm. She had slept maybe 3 hours. She looked tired, fierce, and alive. Gate 19 first? She asked. Gate 19 first, Frank said. Before he climbed in, Eda Ven called to him from the top of the Mercy Hall steps. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane Ruth had found in a storage closet. Around her shoulders was the same scarf Ruth had given her on the first night. In her hand was her old transit card. The red stamp still marked one side. Transport denied. Sarah helped her turn it over. On the back, Janet Cole had placed an Earth protection seal. It was not elegant. The ink had bled at one edge. Beneath it, in crooked black marker, a child from Mercy Hall had written 6 words. You are not a burden here. Eda held the card out to Frank. He took it carefully. For a moment, he was back at Gate 19, with rain in the doorway and an old woman apologizing for the water on his floor. Then he was here, in the soft glow of Mercy Hall, with the bus idling warm behind him, and a line of people inside the building who had been entered by name. Frank handed the card back. "Keep it," he said. "We may need to show the next station what a denied card looks like when Earth is done with it." Sarah translated. Etta smiled. Frank climbed into the driver's seat. Sarah took the first side seat, where she could see the road and the passengers. Tovin Rell sat 2 rows back with a tool bag on his lap, because he did not trust the heater unless he could argue with it personally. Mirasol sat beside him with her book of names. Oren Pell sat near the window, Luma's card in his breast pocket, facing the dawn. The doors folded shut. Frank set both hands on the wheel. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shone with it. Harbor Row was waking slowly. Delivery trucks, steam from diner vents, workers at bus stops, a city still poor, still tired, still full of broken things. But somewhere beyond the warehouses, another transit shelter was lit. Somewhere under a bad roof, someone might be holding a card that told them they had been denied. Somewhere, a system might be waiting for sunrise to call them unclaimed. Frank released the brake. The old bus rolled forward, warm inside, its amber sign bright against the gray morning. Behind him, Etta Ven's voice rose softly. She was teaching the children of Mercy Hall a song from the heat house of Maraveh. Sarah translated only the first line, then let the melody carry the rest. Frank drove toward Gate 19. And for the first time in the long history of cold stations and closed doors, there was a last stop that came looking for the people no one wanted. And maybe that was why the old bus mattered. Not because it was powerful, not because it could cross the stars, but because, on the coldest night of their lives, when every system in the galaxy had decided those elderly refugees were no longer worth carrying, one tired man on Earth opened the door. Frank Doyle did not save them because he had plenty to give. He saved them because he knew what it felt like to be one mistake away from being thrown aside. And in the end, Earth did not become a sanctuary through speeches, flags, or promises. It became a sanctuary through a warm seat, a cup of soup, a name written down before sunrise, and a bus that refused to leave the forgotten behind. So if this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who still believes kindness has power. And subscribe to the channel for more science fiction stories about the moments when humanity proves what it is really made of. Because somewhere in the dark, there is always one more door waiting to be opened.